Hi there, everybody. And firstly, before I start off the webinar, I just want to say thank you for watching and giving me the opportunity to share where I've been going with neurodiversity inclusion. And I'm going to introduce myself shortly, a little bit more about my background, and then straight into the webinar. So originally, what I was going to originally do in this webinar was actually turned out to be rather packed out, and there's a lot to get through. So I've now decided I'm going to separate these into two parts. So the first part, from moving from good intentions to implementation, part one, will be looking a little bit more closely at some of the perceptions of neurodiversity inclusion, and I'll explain why in just a moment. But to introduce myself, my professional background is I've worked in education for 19 years, and during that time, it's not in any one particular phase. I've worked in middle schools, I've worked in secondary and sixth form schools, I've worked in further education, and currently I'm working in a special education. So I've got quite a variety of experience in different phases of the education sector that puts me in quite a position where I'm able to sort of see how different approaches to leadership and management and inclusion works in the different phases. And I've held positions of leadership management for 16 of those years. And so I've been part of those systems. And so it's been really enlightening, really, to develop an understanding of what works well, what doesn't work well. And this experience has led towards becoming a fellow of the Chartered Management Institute. A bit about my academic background. I have a bachelor's degree in mathematics and also a PGCE from Cambridge University. And this is all in secondary education with QTS. I also have an MBA with distinction, which was focused quite a bit on educational leadership and management, but I tailored it towards neurodiversity inclusion. And I did a major project called Promoting Neurodiversity, an investigation into ways disabling environments construct barriers to strategic advantage. So it's not just about how to make accommodations. It's about making purposeful accommodations that works for everybody. So it allows the neurodivergent employee to be feeling that sense of belonging and protecting the psychological safety of employees. But at the same time, it benefits the collective good, as in the organization moving forward. And this September, I'm starting on a Doctorate of Education program, and where I'll be digging a little bit more into this area, quite a little bit more. And a bit of personal background. I am autistic. I'm a late diagnosed autistic, and there's a whole story behind that. I'm also dyslexic, and I've also experienced trauma and mental health challenges. And so with all these things combined, gives me quite a unique perspective, and this is what neurodiversity is about. It is about unique perspectives and being able to be yourself and understanding that people can see things in different ways. And so a lot of the work that I've done effectively is driven by this experience, this collective experience, and it's getting more and more fascinating the time I spend on this. So in terms of the webinar itself, for moving from good intentions to implementation, the aims of this part really is to introduce and discuss what I've called an integrated perceptions model, which leads towards well-informed intentions. So without doubt, there's a lot of good intentions out there for neurodiversity inclusion. A lot of people I've spoken to all really want to do something really, really well. But sometimes don't always have the knowledge or the understanding to really sort of know how to move it forward. And I think this is really important, is that the foundations have to be really firm. And those intentions are actually well informed, because that will then give employers the chance to feel comfortable in then implementing strategies without worrying if it'll go right or not go right, etc. And so I've been thinking about these perceptions. So this first webinar is about well-informed intentions, and I'll talk about the integrated perceptions model. The next webinar I'll do in the future is the actual implementation side of it. So doing an analysis of the workplace, doing an analysis of your neurodivergent employees' talents as well as their difficulties, and then look and how we can use a kind of a different way of using the TOES matrix, which generates strategies. which supports generating strategies to help with identifying the appropriate accommodations for individual workplaces, because no two workplaces are exactly the same. No two autistic or neurodivergent person is the same, and that's what makes neurodiversity inclusion quite challenging in terms of the way we think, is because it's not something that can be fixed immediately. It is something that has to be managed. So we'll go straight into the actual perceptions model. So the three areas that I've been looking into is the perceptions of disability, the perceptions of what strategy is, and because that can play a big part in the mindset of an employer, and also the perception of team functionality. How do teams work? How do organizations work? And those are three areas that I've constantly come up to when I've been exploring this in more depth. So when we're talking about perceptions of disability, there are two models in play. Because neurodiversity is a protected characteristic under the Equalities Act, but under the umbrella term of disability, I do feel that there's sometimes a confusion between what disability is, and it depends on what kind of approach you take. So we have the medical model view, and we have the social model view. So the medical model view views an individual as having something wrong with them that needs to be fixed, and is very sort of centered on the individual, and not considering anything else other than there's something wrong with that person. That person needs fixing to fit the fixed systems that we're in. Whereas with the social model view, actually views disability as more sort of the environmental factors disabling for an individual, rather than something being wrong with the individual. It's more sort of dependent on where the individual is in, whichever environment that they're in, the barriers in that environment can actually be highly restrictive and disabling. And so it's more about sort of the holistic view of a I don't know if holistic is the right term, but the whole view of an organization. Does it accommodate? Does it have policies and practices that actually disable individuals that work for them? So when we sort of think about the restrictiveness as well, and a little bit about psychological safety here. If we look at a sort of a charts where we've got high level potential for an employee and high level difficulty for employee, and we've got all these different skills that thinking and brain skills that people have, and just environmental parameters, as I'll explain, are things like policies and practices, leadership and management styles, and general communication amongst workplaces, etc. You might find that neurotypicals fit a particular profile, and they're quite close together. And the parameters, and this is more sort of how from history really of how things are, the parameters are very much set around the neurotypical expectations. So when you have somebody who is neurodivergent, they have a very, they have a spiky profile, a spikier profile than neurotypical people. So there's things that are real high potential, real strengths, real talents, but the things that neurodivergent people find very challenging. And what the medical model does here, though, is that it focuses on how do you make these skills more neurotypical or fit into that neurotypical expectations. What the medical model doesn't do is consider the strengths, these untapped skills, and how well that they could really fit into an organization. And then what this does really is it ignores these strengths and undervalues and underutilizes neurodivergent employees, and that gives someone a less feeling of belonging in an organization. They know they can do really well with something, but are not being recognized for that, because they're more being recognized about what they can't do and what they struggle with. And when a medical model only focuses on challenging these, reminds a neurodivergent employee that they need to adjust to fit in. That's not a sense of belonging. That's making people feel like they have to adapt to fit into that environment. And that's certainly not what the Equality Act promotes. The Equality Act is a floor standard, and it is about an organisation making the accommodations to meet the needs of neurodivergent individuals. So how the social model differs is that it takes a look at its parameters and explores what all the potential that they have within their organization, and then expand those parameters by making accommodations around the employees. And you see from this diagram here that the neurotypical employees are unaffected by it. And this is something that I think is a misconception sometimes, and quite often, is that when accommodations are being made for neurodivergent staff, is that it's going to disadvantage neurotypical employees. Well, actually, it doesn't. When looking at it from this diagram perspective, you see there's actually opens up a massive amount of opportunity and potential to grow. So, if coming to summarising the perceptions of disability, you have the medical model that focuses on fixing an individual to integrate into a fixed environment and does not concern itself with individual strengths. And then the social model focuses on how societal barriers disable an individual with differences, and also encourages greater inclusion by removing barriers to participation. And the operative word there is inclusion. So just before I move on, I forgot to mention as well, if you do have questions to ask, please do feel free to write them in the comments, and I'll definitely address them at the end. But I can understand that questions can arise as and when I go through the presentation, and questions are really good for me as well, in the sense of it challenges my thinking and helps me to develop my understanding further too, because we're all in this together. Now, the next thing we're going to look at is the perception of strategy. Now, when I look at what the Institute for Strategy and Competitiveness at Harvard Business School described strategy, which I do recommend have a look at, because it's very, very, it's an easy read, which is good for me, and it explains it really well. And there's two ways you can consider strategy. Is the strategy for competing to be the best, or is it about competing to be unique? So Harvard Business Schools say that competing to be the best, it's about to be number one, focus on market share, so that narrow part in the market, serve the best customer with the best product, and compete by imitation. You see how sort of narrow that really is when you think about it. Whereas when you're looking at competing to be unique, earning higher returns, focus on the profits, meet diverse needs of target customers, and competing by innovation, you can probably see where neurodiversity may come in, because innovation is driven by diverse ways of thinking, and also having a diverse team and neurodiverse organization, helps to understand the diverse needs of target customers too. So there's actually quite a bit of benefit to consider strategies competing to be unique as a mindset for an organization. So the impact of that on neurodiversity inclusion, and examples for competing to be the best mindset, is that you focus solely on being the best can lead to a lack of consideration for diverse perspectives and needs, as in there's only one way of doing something. And sometimes the comments like, this is how we do things around here, that kind of comments, that those can actually be quite dismissive of diverse perspectives. And often with neurodivergent employees, is that they can see things in different ways and can problem solve in creative ways. But if those skills are not being considered, then that can have a detrimental effect. Prioritizing competition over collaboration, which can create a toxic work environment. So when it's competition, people become in competition with one another, when it's always about striving to be the best. And the trouble with striving to be the best, there's winners and there's losers, and you can't have winners and losers inside an organization, because that creates a toxic work environment. If everyone's trying to trip each other up within that working environment, that environment's doomed to fail. So competing to be the best can actually lead towards internal competition, prioritizing this over actually collaborative approach to work on something collectively. And then a winners takes all mentality can discourage individuals with different thinking styles from contributing their unique ideas and skills. And I like to sort of think of this as akin to the quiet quitting that we've been hearing about quite a bit recently. And where it gets to the point where you think, well, there's no point me even trying now. I'm just going to just do my job, go to work and just carry on. And that's a real shame, that to have an environment where you don't feel that you're valued and have that sense of belonging. So some of the things that are with competing to be unique is that it's very internalized, very thinking about how you work together, really. Implementing a unique neurodiversity inclusion strategy, so it helps to retain neurodiverse talent. It also looks very much more attractive to people to want to work for you. Unique strategies can also create a more inclusive workplace. So again, it's about sort of that uniqueness. But this is the last bit really that's really quite important. When you're embracing that neurodiversity as a competitive advantage, companies can differentiate themselves in the market and appeal to a broader range of customers who value diversity and inclusion. So as opposed to competing to be the best, where you're just everybody's targeting all these different organizations, all targeting one particular place in the market, you're going to have your winners and your losers, and it can actually cause issues within your organization through competition over collaboration, toxic environments, and so on. Whereas when you're competing to be unique, you're looking for a space in the market that's your stall, that's your bit, that's your uniqueness. And you need diverse ways of thinking to be able to do that. So coming back to a summary, competing to be the best can prioritize competition over collaboration, driven by being the best at one thing, and then unique perspectives can often be dismissed. Competing to be unique values unique perspectives as opportunities for innovation. Companies can occupy unique space in their market that they're in, and encourage collaboration on innovative projects. So you could actually collaborate with other organizations to work on something, etc. So it opens a lot of opportunity when people are involved and people are working together. So a couple of perceptions there, because it can obviously go a lot more in depth with these things. So this is a summary. We're going to look now at perceptions of team functionality. Now, it's not necessarily about team leadership and management, because leadership management I find is would be more suited to the implementation side of things. It's how you get stuff done, and having that vision, of course. So what this model can do is help shape the vision. So what do we think about the way teams work? Well, there's two different ways you can think. There is a reductionist thinking, which is about considering the whole as being the sum of its parts. It doesn't concern itself with the interactions between those parts. So you've got, like, for example, an environment here in the green circle. You've got 5 elements within there, 5 people working in that same environment. And reductionist thinking just thinks of the individuals, their individual strengths and weaknesses, and that's it. So it becomes very individualized. Whereas with systems thinking, systems pays close attention to the interactions between the elements. So it don't quite depersonalize, but it does to a degree, because you still have the same people in there with their strengths and their challenges. But actually, what's really important is how does that team work together? How does that team function as a unit to achieve the outcomes that they set out to achieve? And I couldn't think of a better example than a recent visit. I went to Wembley last Thursday it was, to watch the England Lionesses play against Brazil in the finalissima. And I usually sit in this sort of area of the crowd because of the way what I really like about team sport, is looking at how the systems flow and how the groups of players move up and down the pitch and work together. And I can see that quite well when I'm sat in this kind of position. And of course, England won, which makes it a bonus. So if just one of the pictures that I took here is a good picture for this example. You can see the Lionesses in the white shirts. You've got the Brazil team in the yellow. Now, if I view these players, there's 9 that I've got in the photograph here. I've got my defensive players here, so the goalkeeper and the defensive players. I have the midfielders here, and I've got my striker here. Now, if I was taking a reductionist thinking approach, I'd just be looking at these individual players and how do they, what's their strengths, what's their challenges, what are they really good at, and what do they need to work on? That kind of focus. But it doesn't really give me much information. If you think about some of the football teams that are around at the moment who, buy star strikers and think that buying a collection of star players is going to instantly bring success, and then wonder why it doesn't. Because they don't focus on the interactions. They don't see how players fit into a system. But this is why the England Lionesses are so good. I know they lost last night, but that's okay. There's blips every now and again. But it looks at the interactions between the players. How well do they link up? How well do they communicate? How well do they work together? And you can see there that the interconnectivity, the lanes between each of these players are there in blue. Now, this is elite level football. And you'll also notice how well positioned the Brazilian teams are in disrupting that system. You see, they're almost spot on, stood on the lines at that point in time. And this is why the Lionesses are moving the ball upwards now to that top red player there. So you can see now that the idea behind what the Brazilians are doing is to actually disrupt that system, and England have to then reshape. And it's constantly ever flowing and dynamic. And if you've got a team that interacts so well, they can get the ball up the pitch. And so here's a sort of when the commentary from some of the commentary from that game. You can see that England's goal was a very well worked goal. So we'll just watch that now. So when the system works well, they can really open up the opportunities to reach their goal. So just to summarize this section on perception of team functionality, we're saying about reductionist thinking, which considers the whole as only being the sum of its parts and only focuses on each individual as a separate entity. And then you've got systems thinking, which it focuses on interactions between all the elements within the whole, and also favors functionality and encourages collaboration. Because we saw there with the Lionesses, the collaboration there leading into the goal, they all moved around. They weren't exactly always in their own position either. So there was not a that's not my job mentality either. They worked together for collective good because their interactions were so good. So let me take a closer look though, and after that, and we just take the model away for a second and line them up. We've got reductionist thinking competing to be the best and the medical model. And we've got that summary there, and then look at the definition of integration. Integration is to mix with and join society or a group of people, often changing to suit their way of life, habits, and customs. So integrating is about moving into a fixed environment and how to make adaptations to fit in that environment. So when people are thinking that they're being inclusive, but are using these three different, but from the three different perceptions above it, actually what they're doing is integrating. They're not really including, because they're not using the three perceptions above, not utilizing the individual as their authentic self. So, but when we look at the other three, system thinking competing to be a unique social model of disability, this does actually lead more towards inclusion. The idea that everyone should be able to use the same facilities, take part in the same activities, and enjoy the same experiences, including people who have a disability or other disadvantage. So the three perspectives do sort of support what inclusion is. So it's natural then to think, how do we move from an integration perspective focus to an inclusion focus? And so, training, it would be a really effective starting point, which is something that I do offer, where we can go into depth about the about the different models of disability and where people are at in their thinking with it and understanding. What's their thinking, understanding organization wide of what competition is as part of strategy, and also the different types of ways of thinking about their teams, and focusing on accommodations, focused on the improving the interactions between people. This is something, and every organization are in different positions. So there are research ways you could use, research methods to be able to professionally do it, like a professional inquiry, to see where is your organization right now, what training then needs to be in place to make it a complete inclusion focus, and then it's the change management plan thereafter. Well, developing strategies and change management plan. So that's it for this first bit of the webinar for part 1, because part 2 is then about the next steps in the sense of the implementation side of things. And so I'm just going to switch back now to look at any questions, any comments. There's none on so far, so any feedback would also be really, really helpful. So no comments, no questions. Nope. Oh, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Okay, so if we don't have any further comments or questions, I'll finish there. But I'll leave it open for the remaining couple of minutes, and any further questions, I'll respond through my LinkedIn page. Thank you very much, everybody. Take care.